What if everything we believe about the birth of civilization is written in the wrong order? What if the first cities were not born from farms, but existed before the first seed was ever planted in the soil? Before the domestication of wheat, before the slow, patient gathering of grain, before humanity, as we understand it, chose to settle down at all. Stand for a moment in the mind of conventional history. We are told a story, clear, linear, comforting in its simplicity. First came the wanderers, the hunters, the gatherers, small bands moving with the seasons, following herds, picking fruit, living light upon the earth. Then, around 12,000 years ago, something shifted. Humanity discovered agriculture. We planted seeds, we waited, we harvested, and from that single act of cultivation, everything else followed. Settlements became villages. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. Civilization, we are told, was born from the furrow in the ground. But what if that story is incomplete? What if, buried beneath the weight of millennia, there are places that refuse to fit this narrative? Places where stone was laid in patterns, where streets were conceived, where something resembling a city, an idea of gathering, of structure, of intention, existed long before anyone had reason to stay. If you are drawn to the kind of history that does not rest easily in textbooks, the kind that lives in the spaces between myth and archaeology, between silence and whisper, then stay. Like this video only if it pulls at something deep within you. Subscribe only if you wish to continue this journey into what was forgotten. And tell me in the comments below where you are listening from tonight. From what corner of this world are you hearing these words? Because tonight we are going to walk backward. Not into the familiar fields of early farmers, but further into a time when cities, or something very much like them, may have already existed. And if that is true, then the question is not how civilization began. The question is, what came before? And why was it lost? Let us begin not with answers but with stones. In the highlands of southeastern Turkey, there is a place called Göbekli Tepe. You may know it already. It has become famous in recent years. A site of immense circular stone pillars, carved with animals, arranged in rings, constructed over 11,000 years ago. Predates agriculture. Predates pottery. It predates, by thousands of years, anything we would call a permanent settlement. And yet it required planning, coordination, a gathering of people who came, worked, and carved meaning into stone, then left again. But Göbekli Tepe is not alone. Across the same region, modern-day Turkey, Syria, northern Iraq, archaeologists have uncovered other sites. Karahan Tepe, Navali Kori, Bankuklu Tarla, each one older than the invention of farming. Each one displaying a level of organization that should not exist in a world of wandering hunters. Stone platforms, arranged courtyards, enclosures that suggest purpose, repetition, intention. Not random campsites, but something more. And here is where the ground beneath our understanding begins to shift. Because if these sites are not villages, and they are not, for no one lived there year-round, then what are they? They are too elaborate to be mere hunting camps. Too deliberate to be accidental. They suggest gathering, ritual, cooperation on a scale that requires something we usually associate with settled life. Social complexity, hierarchy, division of labor, and, perhaps most unsettling of all, a shared vision of space. A vision that looks, in some dim and distant way, like the concept of a city. Now let us move further. Let us leave the highlands of Anatolia and travel across time and distance to another place, another culture, another mystery, to the deserts of Peru, to a site called Caral Soup. Caral is older than the pyramids of Egypt, older than Mesopotamian ziggurats. It dates back nearly 5,000 years, and it is one of the oldest known urban centers in the Americas. But here is what makes it strange. Caral had no pottery. No ceramics, no evidence of warfare, no fortifications, and yet it had pyramids, plazas, residential complexes, amphitheaters. It had the layout of a city, the infrastructure, the planning, the scale, but it existed in a time and place where, according to conventional thought, such things should not yet have been conceived. And like Göbekli Tepe, Carroll challenges the assumption that cities are born from agriculture. Yes, the people of Carroll ate fish. They gathered wild plants. They may have begun experimenting with cultivation, but their economy was not firmly rooted in farming. And yet they built. They organized. They came together in a way that transcends survival and enters the realm of culture, of identity, of something that whispers the word, civilization. So here is the pattern beginning to emerge. Sites that predate what we call the Neolithic Revolution, the so-called dawn of farming, and yet display signs of urban planning, collective effort, monumental construction. Sites that suggest humanity was experimenting with something long before we are told it was possible. And if we look closely, if we allow ourselves to see beyond the boundaries of accepted chronology, we begin to find more. In the Jordan Valley, at a place called Wadi Fainan, archaeologists have uncovered evidence of large communal structures dated to over 11,000 years ago. Not homes, but gathering places, spaces designed for groups, for purpose, and nearby traces of pathways. Not random trails, but deliberate routes, proto-streets, carved into the earth by repeated use, connecting one structure to another. Proto-streets. Let that phrase settle in your mind for a moment. Because streets are not natural. They are not formed by accident. They are planned. They are the product of intention, of social agreement. They say, this is where we walk. This is how we connect. This is the shape of our shared space. And they existed in rudimentary form before anyone had planted a field. Now travel with me to the northern coast of Peru again, but earlier this time, to a site called Second Bajo. Here, archaeologists have uncovered a circular plaza dated to 3500 BCE. It is one of the oldest examples of public architecture in the Americas. And around it, traces of pathways, stone foundations, and what appear to be planned residential zones. Not a village, but a template, a blueprint for something larger. Something that would, in time, become what we now recognize as a city. But it was built before the city as we define it should have existed. What does this mean? It means that the idea of the city, the concept of gathering, organizing, structuring space around a collective center, may be far older than the practice of living in one year-round. It means that somewhere, deep in the human mind, long before we settled down, there was already a vision, a memory perhaps, or an instinct, something that said we belong together in this shape, in this pattern, in this place. And if that is true, then we must ask, where did that vision come from? Let us consider the evidence more carefully. Let us strip away assumption and look only at what the ground reveals. At Göbekli Tepe, the stone pillars are arranged in circles, concentric rings, each one deliberate, each one aligned. The effort required to quarry, transport, carve, and erect these stones is immense. It would have required hundreds of people working together over years, perhaps decades. And yet, there is no evidence of permanent habitation. No trash heaps, no cooking fires, no homes. So where did they come from, these builders? Where did they sleep? Where did they eat? And why did they return, again and again, to raise these stones? The conventional answer is that Göbekli Tepe was a ritual center, a gathering place for scattered hunter-gatherer bands who came together at certain times of the year, perhaps for feasts, ceremonies, rites of passage. And that answer may be true, but it is also incomplete, because ritual centers require organization. They require planning. They require a degree of social cohesion that we usually associate with settled, agricultural societies. And yet here it is, in full form, thousands of years too early. Unless, of course, it is not too early at all. Unless we have simply misunderstood the timeline. Now, let us look at the patterns themselves. The layouts, the grids. In the southern Levant, at sites like Beta and Jericho, archaeologists have uncovered early structures, pre-pottery Neolithic settlements, that display surprising regularity. Rectangular buildings, shared walls, courtyards, pathways that run parallel, dividing space into blocks. These are not random clusters of huts. They are planned. They are organized according to a logic that anticipates, in dim form, the grid layout of later cities. And this matters, because grid layouts do not emerge naturally. They are not intuitive. They are abstract. They require a mental leap, a decision to impose order on space, to divide the world not as it is, but as we imagine it should be. And that leap, that abstraction, is one of the defining characteristics of urban thought. So why do we see it here in these early sites? Why does it appear before the city itself? One possibility is that the grid, like the ritual center, is older than we think. That it existed first as an idea, a pattern carried in the mind, perhaps encoded in story, myth, or collective memory. And when humanity finally settled down, when agriculture made permanence possible, we did not invent the city from scratch. We remembered it. We rebuilt something that had been lost. But lost from when and where? Let us move across the world now, to a place far removed from Anatolia and the Levant, to the islands of the Pacific, to a site called Nan Madol, off the coast of Pohnpei in Micronesia. Nan Madol is a marvel. It is a complex of artificial islands, constructed from massive basalt columns, arranged in a grid pattern across a shallow lagoon. It dates to around 1200 CE, relatively recent by archaeological standards. But the engineering required to build it is staggering. The stones, some weighing several tons, were transported across water, stacked without mortar, fitted with precision. The layout is geometric, deliberate, urban in every sense, even though it was built by a society we do not typically classify as urban. And here is what is strange. The oral traditions of the region do not describe Nan Madol as something new. They describe it as something restored, something rebuilt. The stories speak of earlier structures, earlier builders, earlier times when the islands were arranged differently, when the world was different, when perhaps something greater once stood in the same place. Now, we cannot take myth as literal history, but we also cannot ignore it, because myths are memory, distorted by time but rooted in something real. And when the same themes appear again and again, when stories of earlier builders, lost cities, forgotten knowledge emerge from cultures separated by oceans and millennia, we must consider the possibility that they are not fabrications, that they are echoes. Echoes of what? Let us return to the earliest sites, to the stone platforms of Anatolia, to the plazas of Peru, to the pathways of the Levant. And let us ask, what if these were not the first attempts at urban planning? What if they were reconstructions? What if they were attempts to recreate, in crude form, something that had existed before and been lost? What if the first cities were not built by the first civilizations, but by those who came before them? There is a term in archaeology, cultural horizon. It refers to a widespread cultural pattern that appears suddenly across a large geographic area, often without clear antecedents. It is as if an idea, a technology, a symbol, a social structure, emerges fully formed, spreads rapidly, then vanishes or transforms. And when archaeologists encounter a cultural horizon, they are often left asking, where did this come from? In the late Pleistocene, just as the last ice age was ending, a cultural horizon appears across the northern hemisphere. We see it in the megalithic structures of Europe, standing stones, dolmens, passage graves. We see it in the mound-building cultures of North America. We see it in the stone circles of Africa and the Middle East. And we see it in the ritual centers of Anatolia and the early urban experiments of the Near East. All of these, in their own way, represent the same impulse, to gather, to build, to mark space as significant, to create, in stone and earth, a permanent statement of presence, of memory, of something that must not be forgotten. And all of them appear roughly at the same time, between 12 and 10,000 years ago, right at the edge of the Ice Age, right at the moment when the climate shifted, when the world warmed, when the glaciers retreated and the seas rose and the coastlines of the continents were redrawn. Right at the moment when, if there had been a prior civilization, one adapted to the cooler, drier world of the Ice Age, one living on coastlines that are now underwater, it would have been destroyed. Now, this is speculation, but it is not baseless, because we know that sea levels rose dramatically at the end of the Pleistocene, by over 120 meters. Entire landmasses were submerged. The coastlines where humans would naturally have gathered, rich in resources, temperate, easy to navigate, were drowned. And with them, any evidence of habitation, any structures, any cities. What remains are the highlands, the inland sites, the places that were, during the Ice Age, marginal, cold, difficult. And yet it is precisely in these marginal places that we now find the earliest evidence of monumental architecture, of organization, of something that looks, disturbingly, like the remnants of a shattered whole. Could it be that what we are seeing, Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, the stone platforms and pathways and ritual centers, are not the birth of civilization but its resurrection? Not the first attempts but the last memories? Consider the layout of these early sites. They are not crude. They are not primitive. The stone carving at Göbekli Tepe, for instance, is sophisticated. The pillars are smooth, symmetrical, adorned with reliefs of animals. Lions, foxes, scorpions, vultures, rendered with skill and precision. This is not the work of people experimenting with art for the first time. This is the work of people who already knew how to carve, who had a tradition, who were executing a vision that had been refined over time. But if this is not the first time, then when was the first time? And where? Let us look now to South America, to the Andes, to the coastal deserts of Peru and the high plateaus of Bolivia. Here, scattered across inhospitable terrain, are some of the most enigmatic structures in the world. Tiwanaku, Pumapunku, Sacsayhuaman, sites where massive stones, some weighing over 100 tons, were quarried, transported, shaped with uncanny precision, and fitted together without mortar. Sites that display engineering knowledge that seems out of place, out of time, impossible for the cultures we believe built them. And around these sites, the same question arises. How? How did they move these stones? How did they cut them with such accuracy? How did they conceive of these structures, these alignments, these geometric perfections? The conventional answer is that they had time, patience, and manpower, that they used ropes, ramps, levers, ingenuity. And perhaps that is true. But it does not explain why, in some cases, the stones are cut with angles and joints that would challenge even modern engineering. It does not explain why, at Pumapunku, there are H-blocks, interlocking stones that appear to have been shaped by machinery, not chisels. Unless, of course, the tools we imagine they used are not the only tools that existed. Now, let us be clear. We are not speaking here of ancient aliens or lost supertechnologies in the sense of science fiction. We are speaking of knowledge, of technique, of accumulated understanding that may have been developed over a much longer period than we currently allow. And if there were civilizations before the ones we know, civilizations that rose and fell during the Ice Age, whose cities now lie beneath the sea, then it is possible that some of their knowledge survived. Passed down through story, through practice, through the hands of those who rebuilt. And what we see now in these early sites may be the remnants of that knowledge. Fragmentary, distorted, but still present, still whispering through the stones. Let us look at patterns again, not just in one place but across the world. Because if there is a signature of lost knowledge, it is repetition. It is the same idea appearing in places that should have no contact, no shared history, no reason to build in the same way. And we do see repetition. We see stone circles. In Europe, in Africa, in the Middle East. Circles of standing stones, arranged around a central point, used for purposes we can only guess at. Ritual, astronomy, gathering, memory. We see pyramids. In Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in Mesoamerica, in Peru, in China. Massive structures, oriented to cardinal directions, built with astonishing effort, serving as tombs, temples, monuments, symbols of cosmic order. We see grid layouts. In the Indus Valley, in Mesoamerica, in the early Levantine settlements. Streets crossing at right angles, dividing space into blocks, reflecting a conception of order that transcends geography. And we see alignments, structures oriented to solstices, equinoxes, celestial events. From Stonehenge to the pyramids of Giza to the temples of Angkor Wat, a recurring obsession with the sky, with cycles, with marking time in stone. These patterns are not identical, but they are related. They speak a common language, a language of geometry, of orientation, of intention. And they appear again and again in cultures that are supposed to have developed independently. So either this is convergent evolution, the same ideas emerging separately because they are somehow natural to the human mind, or it is something else. Something inherited. Something remembered. Let us focus now on a specific example. A place that has haunted archaeologists and historians for over a century. A place that should not exist and yet does. A place called Çatalhöyük. Çatalhöyük is located in south-central Turkey, not far from Göbekli Tepe, though it is younger, dating to around 7,500 BCE. But what makes it extraordinary is not its age. It is its nature, because Çatalhöyük was a city, not in the modern sense but in form, in scale, in the way it organized human life. It housed between 5 and 10,000 people at its peak. It had no streets, no doors, no alleys. Instead, houses were built side by side, wall to wall, forming a continuous surface. People entered through the roofs, climbing down ladders into their homes. The roofs themselves were the streets, the public space where life unfolded. This is not how cities are supposed to begin. This is not the slow accumulation of dwellings around a central plaza or market. This is something else, something conceived whole, a radical reimagining of space, of community, of how people should live together. And it worked. For over 1,000 years, Çatalhöyük thrived. People painted murals on their walls, images of bulls, vultures, human figures, geometric patterns. They buried their dead beneath their floors. They worshipped, ate, slept, and lived in a density and intimacy that would not be seen again for millennia. But where did the idea come from? How did a community of early Neolithic farmers, people who had only recently begun cultivating wheat and barley, conceive of such a complex, counterintuitive urban form? One possibility, offered hesitantly by some researchers, is that Çatalhöyük was not the first of its kind, that it was modeled on something older, something now lost, that the people who built it were not inventing but remembering. And if we allow that possibility, then we must ask, what were they remembering? Let us move now to the other side of the world, to China, to the Yangtze River Delta, to a site called Liangzhu. Liangzhu dates to around 3,300 BCE. It was a sophisticated urban center, complete with monumental earthworks, hydraulic engineering, jade workshops, and a social hierarchy evidenced by elaborate burials. But here is what is remarkable. Liangzhu had a water management system, canals, dams, reservoirs, an entire infrastructure designed to control flooding, irrigate fields, and channel water for both practical and ceremonial purposes. This is not simple. This is not trial and error. This requires knowledge of hydrology, of engineering, of long-term planning. And it appears in the archaeological record suddenly, as if the knowledge to create it already existed. Now, conventional archaeology explains this by pointing to earlier, smaller sites in the region, to gradual development, to incremental learning. And that may be true, but the gap between what came before and what Liangzhu represents is vast. It is a leap, and leaps in history are rare. They require either genius or inheritance. And when we see the same leap in multiple places, when we see sudden, sophisticated urban planning in Mesopotamia, in the Indus Valley, in Mesoamerica, in China, all within a few thousand years of each other, we must consider the possibility that something was being transmitted. Some body of knowledge, some set of principles, or perhaps some memory of a world that no longer existed. Now let us talk about stone, because stone is honest. Stone does not lie. Stone does not decay easily. Stone preserves. And in stone, across the world, we find anomalies. At Baalbek, in modern-day Lebanon, there is a temple complex built by the Romans. But beneath the Roman stones are older stones, much older, massive blocks, some weighing over 800 tons, cut and fitted with precision, forming a platform upon which the later structures were built. The Romans did not move these stones. They built on top of them. They inherited them, and they had no explanation for who had placed them there or how. At Sacsayhuaman, above the city of Cusco in Peru, there are walls made of stones so large, so precisely cut that no mortar is needed. The joints are so tight that a knife blade cannot fit between them. The Inca, who built the later structures atop these foundations, claimed in their own traditions that the older, larger stones were placed there by a race of giants, in a time before the Inca existed. At Göbekli Tepe, at Karahan Tepe, at sites across Anatolia, we find T-shaped pillars carved from single blocks of limestone, weighing 10 to 20 tons, erected by people who had no metal tools, no wheels, no beasts of burden. And yet the work is exquisite, deliberate, confident. How? The answer we are given is always the same. Patience, manpower, ingenuity. And those are real. Those are part of the story. But they are not the whole story. Because patience does not explain precision. Manpower does not explain knowledge. Ingenuity does not explain why the same solutions appear in places separated by oceans and thousands of years. Unless the ingenuity was not local. Unless the knowledge was not new. Let us consider another thread. The thread of geometry. At the Great Pyramid of Giza, the base is level to within 2 centimeters across a 13-acre footprint. The sides are aligned to the cardinal directions with an accuracy of 1/15 of a degree. The ratio of the pyramid's height to its base perimeter approximates pi. These are not accidents. These are achievements of engineering and mathematical sophistication. At Teotihuacan, in Mexico, the layout of the city follows a precise geometric grid, aligned 15.5 degrees east of true north, an alignment that matches the setting of the Pleiades on a specific date. The Pyramid of the Sun is positioned at a point where natural cave systems intersect, and the entire city is laid out according to a modular unit of measurement that repeats with astonishing consistency. At Angkor Wat, in Cambodia, the temple complex is a scale model of the Hindu cosmos, with measurements that encode astronomical cycles, the precession of the equinoxes, the lunar calendar, the solar year. It is architecture as mathematics, as cosmology, as a statement that the builders understood the heavens and sought to mirror them on earth. These are not primitive cultures. These are cultures with deep knowledge, with systems of thought that rival our own in complexity, if not in technology. And yet, according to conventional timelines, they developed this knowledge independently, in isolation, without contact, without shared tradition. But is that credible? Is it reasonable to believe that human beings, separated by vast distances, would all arrive at the same conclusions, that geometry matters, that alignment matters, that the cosmos should be reflected in stone, without any transmission of ideas? Or is it more reasonable to believe that there was a source, a common ancestor, a body of knowledge that predates all of these civilizations and was, in different ways, preserved and remembered by each of them? Now, we must tread carefully here. We are not suggesting a single, monolithic, lost civilization that ruled the entire world. That is fantasy. What we are suggesting is more subtle. We are suggesting that during the Ice Age, when the world was colder and drier and the coastlines extended far beyond their present reach, there may have been cultures, plural, that achieved a level of sophistication we do not currently recognize. Cultures that lived on the now submerged continental shelves, that built in wood and earth and other materials that do not preserve well, that developed knowledge of astronomy, geometry, navigation, agriculture, perhaps even writing. And when the Ice Age ended, when the floods came, when the seas rose and the world changed, those cultures were destroyed. Their cities drowned. Their populations scattered. And the survivors carried what they could, stories, techniques, fragments of knowledge, into the highlands, into the interior, into the places where they rebuilt. And what we see now in the archaeological record is the echo of that rebuilding. The attempt, across the world, to recreate what was lost, to remember what had been forgotten, to restore, in crude approximation, the patterns of an earlier time. This is not proof. This is hypothesis. But it is a hypothesis that fits the evidence in ways that the conventional narrative struggles to do. Let us examine one more site, one more piece of the puzzle. A place called Poverty Point in Louisiana, in the southeastern United States. Poverty Point dates to around 1500 BCE. It is a massive earthwork complex, a series of concentric ridges arranged in a half-circle, with mounds at strategic points, covering over 400 acres. The ridges are not random. They are geometric, aligned, intentional. And the sheer volume of earth moved to create them, estimated at over 1 million cubic meters, suggests a labor force and level of organization that, according to conventional understanding, should not have existed in pre-agricultural North America. But here it is, undeniable, a monument, a gathering place, a city without buildings, perhaps, but a city nonetheless in its conception, its scale, its purpose. And once again, we must ask, where did the idea come from? The people of Poverty Point were hunter-gatherers. They did not farm. They did not have metal. They did not have writing. And yet they organized labor, moved earth, and created a structure that speaks of planning, of vision, of collective effort on a scale that rivals anything built by the early agricultural societies of the Near East or Mesoamerica. How? Unless they, too, were remembering. Unless they, too, had inherited something. Pattern. A blueprint. A memory of how space should be organized, how communities should gather, how the earth itself could be shaped into meaning. And if Poverty Point, isolated as it is in time and space, can display such sophistication, then what does that say? About the rest of the world? About the countless other sites that have not been excavated, or have been eroded away, or lie beneath the waves? Let us return to the sea, because the sea is where the answers may ultimately lie. During the last glacial maximum, around 20,000 years ago, sea levels were 120 meters lower than they are today. That is the height of a 40-story building. Entire landscapes were exposed, landscapes that are now ocean floor. The Persian Gulf was a river valley. The North Sea was dry land. Indonesia and Malaysia were connected by plains. The coasts of every continent extended far beyond their present boundaries. And it is precisely these coastal regions, rich in resources, temperate, easy to navigate, where human populations would have concentrated, where settlements would have been built, where, if there were early cities, they would have stood. And all of it is now underwater, inaccessible, unexplored, lost. We have mapped less than 20% of the ocean floor in high resolution. Less than 5% has been directly explored. And what little we have found is tantalizing. Submerged structures off the coast of India, stone formations off the coast of Japan, anomalies off the coast of Cuba, each one debated, contested, dismissed, or ignored, but each one suggesting that there may be more beneath the waves than we have allowed ourselves to imagine. Now, imagine for a moment that we could drain the oceans, that we could walk the coastlines as they were 12,000 years ago. What would we find? Would we find only campsites and fishing stations, as conventional thought suggests? Or would we find something else? Something that would force us to rewrite the timeline of human civilization entirely? We do not know. We cannot know. Not yet. But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And the patterns we do see on land, in the highlands, in the marginal places where humanity fled when the waters rose, suggest that there was something to flee from. Something to remember, something perhaps to mourn. Let us consider now the myths, because myths, as we have said, are memory. Distorted, yes. Symbolic, yes. But rooted in something real. Across the world, in cultures separated by oceans and millennia, there are flood myths. Stories of a great deluge, of waters rising, of civilizations lost, of a few survivors who carried knowledge into a new world. The Epic of Gilgamesh speaks of Utnapishtim, who survived the flood and was granted immortality. The Bible speaks of Noah. Hindu texts speak of Manu. Greek myths speak of Deucalion. Native American traditions speak of waters covering the earth and the emergence of new peoples. Aboriginal Australian stories speak of the drowning of the land. Chinese myths speak of Gun and Yu who controlled the floods. These are not identical stories, but they share a core. The world was different. Water came. The old world ended. The new world began. And if we place these myths against the backdrop of geological fact, the rapid sea level rise at the end of the Ice Age, they begin to look less like fantasy and more like history. Oral history, passed down through countless generations, preserving the memory of a real event, a real catastrophe, a real loss. And if the floods were real, then what else in the myths might be real? The stories of earlier builders, of giants, of gods who came and taught humanity the arts of civilization, of golden ages that preceded the age of struggle. We cannot take these literally, but we also cannot dismiss them entirely, because they are too widespread, too consistent in theme, too insistent that something came before, that humanity did not begin in ignorance, but in the shadow of something greater, something lost. Now let us bring this back to the evidence, to the cities that were not supposed to exist, to the stone platforms and pathways and grid layouts that appear before agriculture, before settled life, before the conventional birth of civilization. What are they? One interpretation is that they are experiments, that humanity in scattered places tried out the idea of gathering, of building, of organizing space, and that most of these experiments failed. Only a few succeeded and gave rise to the civilizations we know. But another interpretation is that they are not experiments, that they are restorations, that they are attempts to rebuild something that was known, something that was lost, something that existed before and was swept away. And if that is true, then the question is not, when did civilization begin? The question is, when did it end? When did the first cycle close? And how many cycles have there been? This is not a comfortable question. It challenges not just timelines, but the very idea of progress. The idea that history moves forward, that each age builds on the last, that we are standing at the pinnacle of human achievement. It suggests instead that history is cyclical, that civilizations rise and fall, that knowledge is gained and lost, that we may not be the first to walk this path, and we may not be the last. And if that is true, then everything we build, our cities, our technologies, our certainties, is fragile, temporary, subject to forces beyond our control, subject to time, to climate, to the earth itself, which does not care for our ambitions. But there is also something profound in this, because if we are not the first, then we are not alone. We are part of a continuity, a deep thread that runs through time, connecting us to those who came before, to those who will come after. We are, in the truest sense, remembering. Let us look now at one final site, a place that brings all of these threads together, a place called Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, Turkey. Derinkuyu is an underground city, not a cave system, but a constructed, multi-level complex carved into the soft volcanic rock, descending over 80 meters into the earth. It has ventilation shafts, water wells, storage rooms, living quarters, communal spaces, even spaces that appear to have been used for religious purposes. Could house, at its peak, over 20,000 people. We know that Derinkuyu was used by various cultures over the centuries. Early Christians fleeing persecution, later inhabitants seeking refuge from invasions. But we do not know who carved it, or when. Radiocarbon dating is useless here. There is no organic material in the rock itself. Stylistic analysis suggests it may be thousands of years old. Some researchers have speculated it could date back to the Bronze Age, or even earlier. But no one knows for certain. What we do know is that it represents a staggering feat of engineering. The coordination required to excavate such a space, to ensure structural stability, to create ventilation systems that work across multiple levels, to plan the layout so that it functions as a coherent whole. This is not the work of a few people with hand tools. This is the work of a society with knowledge, resources, and a reason to build. But what reason? Why go underground? Why create a city in the dark? One possibility is defense, protection from invaders, from war, from surface threats. But there is another possibility, hinted at in the design itself, protection from climate, from cold, from storms, from a world that had become, for a time, unlivable above ground. And if Derinkuyu was built during or just after a period of catastrophic climate change, during the rapid warming at the end of the Ice Age, for instance, or during the Younger Dryas cold snap that followed, then it begins to make sense. Not as a primitive refuge, but as a sophisticated survival strategy. A way to preserve life, community, knowledge, through a time of chaos. And once again, we must ask, who taught them to do this? Who had the knowledge to plan such a structure? And where did that knowledge come from? Perhaps it came from experience, from a collective memory of survival, from a time when humanity had to adapt, to innovate, to preserve itself in the face of forces that threatened extinction. And perhaps that memory was carried forward, encoded not just in myth but in practice, in the very act of building. Now let us step back. Let us look at the whole picture, at all the sites, all the patterns, all the anomalies that refuse to fit the conventional narrative. We have Göbekli Tepe with its massive stone circles, built by hunter-gatherers who should not have had the organization to build them. We have Çatalhöyük, with its radical urban form, conceived whole and maintained for over a millennium. We have Karasup with its pyramids and plazas, built before ceramics, before farming as we understand it. We have Poverty Point with its geometric earthworks, built by non-agricultural societies in North America. We have the stone platforms of the Levant, the pathways that predate streets, the grid layouts that predate cities. And we have the myths, the flood stories, the tales of earlier builders, the insistence across cultures and centuries that something came before. What does it all mean? It means that the story we tell ourselves about human history is incomplete. It is a story that begins too late and explains too little. It is a story that assumes a single linear path from simplicity to complexity, from ignorance to knowledge, from wandering to settlement. But the evidence suggests otherwise. The evidence suggests that the path was not linear, that it was cyclical, that humanity has risen before and fallen before, that we have built before and lost before, and that what we see now in the archaeological record is not the first chapter but a later one, a chapter of rebuilding, of remembering, of restoring what was lost. And if that is true, then we must ask ourselves, what else have we forgotten? What other knowledge lies buried, not just in the ground, but in the spaces between our certainties? In the questions we do not ask because we believe we already know the answers. Let us think about language for a moment, because language, like stone, is a preserver of memory. And in language there are clues. The oldest known written language is Sumerian, dating to around 3200 BCE. It appears suddenly, fully formed, with a complex grammar and an extensive vocabulary. There is no clear precursor, no gradual evolution from simpler forms. It is as if it was transplanted whole into the archaeological record. And within Sumerian texts, there are references to even older knowledge, to the antediluvian kings who ruled before the flood, to the divine principles or technologies that were given to humanity by the gods, to a time before time when the world was different and knowledge was greater. Now, we can interpret this mythologically, as allegory, as religious symbolism, and that may be part of it. But what if it is also historical? What if the Sumerians, when they wrote of earlier times, were recording actual memory, distorted, yes, but rooted in something real? What if they were not the first to write, but the first to write again? This is speculative, but it is not absurd, because writing is not a natural human activity. It must be invented, or perhaps more accurately, it must be conceived. It requires a leap of abstraction, the idea that sounds can be represented by symbols, that symbols can be arranged to convey meaning, that meaning can be preserved across time and space without the presence of the speaker. That leap is monumental, and it is strange that it appears in multiple places within a few centuries of each other. Sumerian cuneiform around 3200 BCE. Egyptian hieroglyphs around 3100 BCE. The Indus Valley script around 2600 BCE. Chinese oracle bone script around 1200 BCE. Each one independent, we are told. Each one invented from scratch. But is that credible? Or is it more likely that the idea of writing, the concept itself, was older than any of these scripts, and that what we see in the archaeological record is not invention but reinvention? Not the birth of writing, but its resurrection. And if writing is older than we think, then what was written? What knowledge was recorded, preserved, and then lost when the floods came and the old world ended? We do not know. We may never know. But the possibility alone is enough to shift our understanding, to open the door to questions we have not yet dared to ask. Let us consider now the concept of the city itself. What is a city? It is more than a collection of buildings, more than a concentration of people. A city is an idea. It is the idea that humans can live together in large numbers, that space can be organized, that resources can be managed, that society can be stratified and specialized and governed. And that idea is not obvious. It is not intuitive. For most of human history, hundreds of thousands of years, we lived in small bands. We moved. We followed the seasons. We knew every face in our group. The idea of living among strangers, of trusting systems rather than individuals, of giving up mobility for permanence, this is radical. It goes against instinct. So where did it come from? The conventional answer is that it emerged gradually. That agriculture created surplus. That surplus created population growth. That population growth created the need for organization. And from that need, cities were born. But the evidence we have examined suggests otherwise. It suggests that the idea of the city, of gathering, of organizing space, of building in patterns existed before agriculture, before surplus, before the need. And if the idea existed first, then where did it come from? How did it enter the human mind? One possibility is that it is innate, that humans, like certain social insects, have an instinctual drive to organize space, to create structure, to build. And perhaps that is part of it. But instinct alone does not explain the specificity of what we see. The grids, the alignments, the geometric precision. Another possibility is that the idea was learned, not from nature but from culture, from a prior culture, from a civilization that had already solved the problem of urban living, that had already discovered the principles of planning, of engineering, of social organization. And when that civilization fell, when the waters rose and the cities drowned, the survivors carried the idea forward, not as blueprints but as memory, as stories, as a sense of what was possible. And over time, in different places, that memory was acted upon. The idea was rebuilt. The city was restored. This is a hypothesis. But it is a hypothesis that makes sense of the patterns. It explains why urban forms appear suddenly, why they display sophistication from the start, why they echo each other across vast distances. Because they are not independent inventions. They are variations on a theme that is older than any of them, a theme that was once understood, then forgotten, then remembered. Now let us talk about disappearance, because that is the other side of this mystery. Not just the origin of these early urban experiments, but their end. Many of the sites we have discussed were abandoned. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. The stone circles were covered with earth, as if someone wanted to preserve them, or hide them, or close a chapter. Çatalhöyük was eventually deserted, its roofs collapsing, its walls crumbling, its people moving on. Poverty Point was abandoned, the earthworks left to erode. Karasup fell silent, its plazas empty, its pyramids slowly reclaimed by the desert. Why? What happened? In some cases, we have clues. Climate change, drought, shifts in resources, social upheaval. But in other cases, we do not know. The people simply left and the sites were forgotten, buried by time, rediscovered only in the last century, by archaeologists who were not looking for them, who did not expect them, who had to rewrite their understanding of the past to accommodate them. And that raises a question. How many other sites are still out there, unknown, unexcavated, waiting beneath the soil or the sand or the sea? How much of our history is still hidden? The answer is most of it. The vast majority of the past is inaccessible to us, either because it has been destroyed or because it lies in places we cannot reach, or because we do not yet know where to look. And that means that everything we think we know about the origins of civilization is provisional. It is based on the small fraction of evidence that has survived and been found. And as new evidence emerges, the story changes. It is changing now, with every new discovery, with every site that predates what came before, with every anomaly that refuses to fit the accepted timeline. The story is shifting, becoming more complex, more uncertain, but also more wondrous, because what we are glimpsing through the cracks in conventional history is a deeper past, a past that is not empty, but full, not primitive but sophisticated, not ignorant but knowledgeable, A past that challenges our assumptions about who we are and where we came from. And perhaps most importantly, a past that reminds us that we are not the end of history. We are a point on a continuum, part of a cycle that has turned before and will turn again. Now, let us imagine something. Let us imagine that you are standing in one of these early sites, not as a tourist, but as a participant, as someone who lived there, who helped build it, who knew its purpose. You are standing at Göbekli Tepe 12,000 years ago. The sun is setting. The stones cast long shadows across the ground. Around you, people are gathering, people from different bands, different territories, people you see only at certain times of the year. There is a fire. There is food. There is singing, perhaps, or chanting. And there is the knowledge shared among all of you that this place is special, that it was built for a reason, that it connects you to something larger than yourselves. But what is that reason? What are you remembering? What are you preserving? Perhaps you do not fully know. Perhaps the knowledge has already faded, passed down through so many generations that it has become myth, symbol, ritual. But you feel it. You feel the weight of it, the importance, and you return year after year to this place, to these stones, because something in you knows that if you stop coming, if you stop building, if you stop remembering, then it will all be lost. Again. And maybe it was lost. Maybe that is why the site was eventually buried. Maybe the memory became too heavy, or too faint, or too dangerous. Maybe the world changed, and the stones no longer served their purpose. Or maybe they served it perfectly, and their work was complete. We do not know. But standing there, in your imagination, you can feel the thread. The connection between past and present. Between what was and what is. Between the people who built these stones and you now, reading these words, wondering about them. That thread is real. It runs through all of us. It is the thread of memory, of culture, of the stories we tell ourselves about who we are. And it is a thread that stretches back much further than we have allowed ourselves to believe. Let us consider one more piece of evidence. One more pattern that appears across the world, in the earliest sites, before cities, before writing, before the conventional dawn of civilization. Art, symbolic thought, the representation of ideas in physical form. At Göbekli Tepe, the pillars are carved with animals. At Catalhoyuk, the walls are painted with bulls and vultures and geometric patterns. At Lascaux, at Altamira, at Chauvet Cave in France, at Sulawesi in Indonesia, on rock walls across Africa and Australia, we find images. Images of animals, of humans, of hands, of abstract symbols. Images that are tens of thousands of years old. Some are 40,000 years old. Some may be older still. And these are not crude. They are sophisticated. They show understanding of anatomy, of movement, of perspective. They show artistic skill developed over time. And they show, most importantly, symbolic thought. The ability to represent something that is not physically present. To create meaning that transcends the immediate. To communicate across time. This is not primitive. This is fundamentally human. And it is ancient. Far more ancient than cities. Far more ancient than agriculture. Far more ancient than any of the structures we have discussed. And if symbolic thought, the ability to imagine, to plan, to remember, has been with us for tens of thousands of years, then why should we assume that complex social organization, that urban planning, that the concept of the city could not also have existed in some form much earlier than we currently allow? We assume that these things require writing, require agriculture, require technology. But do they? Or do they only require imagination? Memory? The ability to say, this is how we will live. This is the shape we will give to our world. This is what we will build. And if that ability has always been with us, then the city as an idea is as old as humanity itself. It has simply been expressed differently in different times, in different places, under different conditions. Sometimes on the surface, sometimes underground, sometimes in stone, sometimes in earth, sometimes on coastlines that are now lost beneath the waves. And what we see in the archaeological record is not the origin of that idea, but its persistence, its refusal to die, its continual reemergence again and again, across millennia, across continents, across cultures. Because it is human. It is part of us. It is what we do. Now, let us return to the question we began with, the question that has haunted this entire exploration. What if the first cities were not built by the first civilizations? What if they were built before humans settled down, before agriculture, before the conventional timeline allows? And the answer, based on the evidence, is, it is possible. More than possible. It is likely. Not in the sense that there were gleaming metropolises 10,000 years ago, with skyscrapers and highways and modern technology, but in the sense that the concept of urban organization, of gathering, of planning, of shaping space according to a shared vision, existed long before we thought it did. That it was practiced, experimented with, refined, lost, and remembered, again and again. And if that is true, then the story of civilization is not a story of progress. It is a story of cycles, of rise and fall, of memory and forgetting, of knowledge gained and lost and gained again. And we are, right now, in one of those cycles. We are building, we are remembering, and perhaps, without knowing it, we are repeating patterns that were laid down long ago, by people whose names we do not know, whose cities have vanished, whose stories have been reduced to myth. But they are not gone. They are here, in the stones, in the earth, in the shapes we create, in the ways we organize our lives, in the very concept of the city itself. They are us, and we are them. So where does this leave us? What are we to do with this knowledge, provisional and fragmentary as it is? First, we must be humble. We must recognize that history is not settled, that the past is not a closed book, that every certainty we hold is based on incomplete evidence and is subject to revision, and that revision is not a weakness. It is a strength. It is how we learn, how we grow, how we come closer to truth. Second, we must be curious. We must continue to ask questions, to excavate not just the ground, but the assumptions we build upon, to explore the margins, the anomalies, the places where the conventional narrative breaks down. Because it is in those places that the most profound discoveries are made. And third, we must remember, we must honor the fact that we are not alone in time, that we are part of a continuum that stretches back into the deep past and forward into the unknown future, that the people who came before us were not less than us. They were us. They faced the same challenges. They asked the same questions. And they left behind, in stone and earth and story, the answers they found. Our task is to listen, to read those stones, to hear those stories, to piece together from fragments a picture of what was, not because it changes our present, though it might, but because it enriches it. It gives us depth, context, a sense of belonging to something larger than the brief span of our own lives. Now, let us turn to the question of why. Why does this matter? Why should we care whether the first cities were built before or after agriculture? Why does the timeline matter at all? It matters because the timeline shapes the story we tell about ourselves. It shapes our understanding of human potential, of human nature. If we believe that civilization began 12,000 years ago, with the invention of agriculture, then we see ourselves as young, as still learning, as inherently progressive, moving from ignorance toward enlightenment. But if civilization is older, if the concept of the city, of urban organization, of complex society, predates agriculture by thousands of years, then we must see ourselves differently. Not as builders of something new, but as restorers of something old. Not as innovators, but as rememberers. And that changes everything. It means that the knowledge we now possess of engineering, of mathematics, of astronomy, of governance, is not unprecedented. It means that others have stood where we stand, have faced the challenges we face, have built what we are building, and have perhaps fallen. And if they fell, then we can fall. And that is a sobering thought. But it is also a liberating one, because it means that our fate is not predetermined. It means that we have agency, that we can learn from the past, if we are willing to see it clearly. If we are willing to acknowledge that history is not a straight line, but a cycle, and that cycles can be broken, or at least navigated with greater wisdom. Let us think now about what has been lost, because loss is at the heart of this story. The loss of cities, the loss of knowledge, the loss of entire cultures, entire ways of life, erased by time and disaster and forgetting. And that loss is not ancient. It is ongoing. Even now, sites are being destroyed. By development, by war, by climate change, by neglect. Every year we lose more of the past, more evidence, more threads connecting us to those who came before. And every loss makes the picture harder to reconstruct, the story harder to tell, the truth harder to find. So there is urgency here. Not just academic urgency, but human urgency. Because the past is not separate from the present. It is the foundation upon which the present is built. And if we do not understand the foundation, we cannot understand the structure. We cannot understand ourselves. Let us also consider the future. Because the story we are telling is not just about the past. It is about continuity, about the long arc of human experience. And if that arc includes cycles of rise and fall, of memory and forgetting, then what does that mean for us now? It means that the cities we are building today, our towering metropolises, our sprawling suburbs, our interconnected networks of glass and steel and light, are not permanent. They are temporary. They are part of a cycle. And one day they too may be lost, buried, forgotten, reduced to anomalies in some future archaeologist's excavation. And if that is true, then what should we preserve? What knowledge, what stories, what principles should we encode in a form that can survive? So that if we fall, those who come after can remember, can rebuild, can avoid the mistakes we made. This is not pessimism. This is realism. It is the recognition that civilizations are fragile, that they depend on conditions, climate, resources, social cohesion that can change. And when those conditions change, civilizations adapt or they collapse. But collapse is not the end. It is a transformation, a clearing of the ground. And from that ground, something new grows, something that carries the memory of what came before, even if that memory is dim and distorted. And that is what we see in the archaeological record. Not a single, unbroken line of progress, but a series of beginnings, of fresh starts, of peoples who built on the ruins of those who came before, who inherited fragments of knowledge, who shaped those fragments into something new. We are one of those peoples. We are building on ruins. We are inheriting fragments. And we are shaping them into the world we now inhabit. But we are also, perhaps, approaching another turning point. Another moment when the ground shifts, when the climate changes, when the resources dwindle, when the systems we rely on begin to fray. And when that moment comes, and it will come, we will face the same choice that every civilization has faced. We will adapt or we will fall. We will remember or we will forget. And the degree to which we remember, the degree to which we understand the deep patterns of human history, the cycles, the lessons, the knowledge that has been gained and lost and gained again, will determine which path we take. So this is not an abstract exercise. This is not idle speculation. This is a search for wisdom, for continuity, for the threads that connect us to those who came before and to those who will come after. And those threads are real. They are encoded in the stones, in the earth, in the myths, in the very shapes of the cities we build. They are part of us. And if we listen, if we truly listen, they can guide us. Let us return one last time to the sites themselves, to the stone platforms of Anatolia, to the earthworks of North America, to the sunken plazas of Peru, to the proto-streets of the Levant. What do they tell us? They tell us that humanity has always gathered, that we have always sought connection, that we have always tried to shape space, to impose order, to create meaning out of chaos. And they tell us that this impulse is older than agriculture, older than writing, older than any of the markers we use to define civilization. It is, perhaps, the defining characteristic of being human. We are the species that builds, that plans, that imagines a future and works to bring it into being. We are the species that looks at an empty plain and sees a city, that looks at a blank stone and sees a message, that looks at the chaos of existence and imposes structure, meaning, pattern. And we have been doing this for as long as we have been human, perhaps longer. Perhaps it is what made us human in the first place. So the question is not, when did civilization begin? The question is, when did we begin to remember ourselves? When did we become conscious of the patterns we were creating? When did we recognize that the city, the gathering, the structure, the shared vision was not just a response to need, but an expression of identity, of who we are, of what we aspire to be? And the answer, suggested by the evidence, is far earlier than we thought. Thousands of years earlier, in a time before agriculture, before settled life, in a time when the world was different, when the coastlines extended beyond their present reach, when the climate was cooler and the ice still covered the northern lands. In a time that is lost to us now except in fragments, in stones that do not fit, in sites that should not exist, in myths that insist against all reason that something came before. And if we allow ourselves to believe those myths, not literally but as pointers toward truth, then we must also allow the possibility that the story of civilization is much longer, much more complex, much more cyclical than we have been taught. And that means we are not at the beginning. We are not the first. We are, at best, the latest, the most recent iteration of a pattern that has repeated before and will, perhaps, repeat again. And there is something both humbling and empowering in that. Humbling because it means we are not as special as we thought. Empowering because it means we are part of something greater. Something that transcends our individual lives, our individual cultures, our individual moment in time. We are part of the human story. The long, deep, enduring story. The story of building and losing and rebuilding. Of remembering and forgetting and remembering again. And that story is not over. It is still being written by us now. So what will we write? What patterns will we create? What structures will we leave behind for those who come after? What memories will we encode in stone, in story, in the shapes we give to the world? These are not rhetorical questions. They are real. They are urgent. Because the choices we make now about how we live, how we build, how we organize our societies will ripple forward into the future. They will become the foundations upon which future generations build, or the ruins from which they must salvage what they can. And if we are wise, we will build with an eye toward continuity, toward resilience, toward the long arc of time, not just for ourselves, but for those who will come after. For the people who, thousands of years from now, may stand where we stood and wonder about us, just as we wonder about those who came before. And perhaps they will find our cities buried beneath the earth, our streets overgrown, our towers fallen, and perhaps they will ask the same questions we are asking now. Who were they? What did they know? Why did they build in this way? And what happened to them? And if we have done our work well, if we have preserved not just structures but knowledge, not just technology but wisdom, then perhaps they will find answers. Perhaps they will remember us. And perhaps they will learn from us. And perhaps, in learning, they will avoid the mistakes we made. And the cycle will continue, but with greater awareness, greater continuity, greater hope. This is the gift of the past. This is why it matters. Not because it is gone, but because it is still here. In the stones, in the stories, in the patterns we unconsciously repeat. And if we can learn to see those patterns, to understand them, to honor them, then we can shape the future with greater intention, greater wisdom, greater humility. Now let us end where we began, with a question. What if the world's first cities were built before humans settled down? And the answer, after all of this exploration, is, they may have been. Not in the form we recognize, not with the permanence we associate with urban life, but as concepts, as experiments, as expressions of an impulse that is as old as humanity itself. And if that is true, then the birth of civilization is not a single event. It is not a moment when everything changed. It is a process, a long, slow, cyclical process of building and losing and rebuilding, of remembering and forgetting and remembering again. And we are part of that process. We are, in this moment, in this time, building again, remembering again, restoring, perhaps, something that was lost long ago. And we do not know what the future holds. We do not know whether our cities will endure or fall, whether our knowledge will be preserved or lost, whether we are at the beginning of a new age or the end of an old one. But we do know this: we are not alone. We are part of a lineage, a deep, unbroken lineage that stretches back into the darkness of prehistory and forward into the unknown future. And in that lineage there is continuity. There is memory. There is the stubborn, enduring human refusal to give up, to forget, to stop building. And as long as we continue, as long as we remember, as long as we honor the past, as long as we build with intention and wisdom, then the story will continue. The cycle will turn. And those who come after will have something to learn from, something to build upon, something to remember. So look around you. Look at the city you inhabit, whether it is made of glass and steel or mud and thatch or something in between. Look at the streets, the structures, the spaces where people gather, and recognize that they are not new. They are echoes. They are repetitions of a pattern that is ancient, a pattern that has been created and destroyed and created again, across millennia, across continents, across the long arc of human time. And you are part of that pattern. You are, in this moment, contributing to it, shaping it, carrying it forward. So carry it well. Build with care. Remember, with reverence, and honor the fact that you are not the first and you will not be the last, but you are part of the thread. The long, deep, unbroken thread that connects us all. And in being part of that thread, you carry a responsibility. Not a burden, but a privilege. The privilege of awareness, of knowing that the ground you walk on has been walked before, that the structures you inhabit have been conceived before, that the questions you ask have been asked before in different words, in different languages, by different peoples who nonetheless shared your humanity. And that privilege brings with it a duty, the duty to preserve, to protect, to ensure that the thread does not break, that the memory does not fade, that the knowledge, hard-won over millennia, is not lost again, because it has been lost before. Again and again, civilizations have risen and fallen. Knowledge has been gained and forgotten. Cities have been built and buried. And each time, humanity has had to start over. Not from absolute zero, because the memory lingers encoded in myth, in ritual, in the shapes we instinctively create, but from a place of diminishment. A place where much has been lost and must be painstakingly recovered. And we are, even now, in a process of recovery. We are excavating the past. We are translating ancient texts. We are decoding the symbols left on stone walls and clay tablets. We are reconstructing, from fragments, the story of who we were. And in doing so, we are discovering that we were more than we thought. That our ancestors were more sophisticated, more knowledgeable, more capable than we gave them credit for. And that discovery is humbling, because it means that progress is not guaranteed. That we are not inevitably moving toward greater enlightenment. That the arc of history does not always bend upward. Sometimes it bends down. Sometimes it collapses. And when it does, the knowledge of centuries can be lost in a generation. So what can we do? How do we ensure continuity? How do we protect the thread? The answer is simple but not easy. We remember. We teach. We preserve. We encode our knowledge in multiple forms, in books, in digital archives, in oral traditions, in the structures we build, in the rituals we practice. We make redundancy a virtue. We ensure that if one form fails, others remain. We spread the knowledge as widely as possible so that it cannot be erased by the fall of a single city, a single culture, a single empire. And we listen. We listen to the past. We listen to the stones, the myths, the stories that have survived. We take them seriously, not as literal truth, but as carriers of memory, as pointers toward knowledge that has been forgotten. And we use them as guides, as maps, as keys to unlock the doors that conventional thinking has closed. Because those doors are not locked from the outside. They are locked from the inside, by our assumptions, by our certainties, by our refusal to consider that the past might be more complex, more wondrous, more unsettling than we have allowed ourselves to believe. And if we can unlock those doors, if we can step through them into the deeper past, then we will find not emptiness, but richness. Not ignorance, but knowledge. Not primitives, but people like us. People who built, who planned, who dreamed, who struggled, who remembered. And in finding them, we find ourselves. Now, let us consider a final image. A final thought to carry with you as you drift into sleep, or as you go about your day, or as you look out at the world and wonder about its history. Imagine a city, not a modern city but an ancient one. A city that existed long before history, long before writing, long before agriculture. A city built on the edge of the world, on a coastline that no longer exists, in a time when the climate was different and the sea was lower and the land extended far beyond its present reach. Imagine that city thriving. Imagine streets where people walked. Imagine plazas where they gathered. Imagine structures, made of wood perhaps or earth or stone, where they lived and worked and worshipped and dreamed. Imagine a society with its own knowledge, its own traditions, its own understanding of the world. And then imagine the waters rising, slowly at first, imperceptibly, but rising, year by year, generation by generation, the coastline retreating, the fields flooding, the structures abandoned, the people moving inland, carrying what they could, tools, seeds, stories, memories. And imagine those people scattered across the highlands, the interior, the marginal lands, trying to rebuild, trying to remember, trying to recreate in new places the patterns they had known, the shapes of gathering, the structures of community, the city itself, or at least the idea of the city, preserved in memory and reconstructed in stone and earth. And imagine that reconstruction happening again and again, in different places at different times, as the survivors spread across the world and carried the memory with them. And imagine that memory fading, distorting, becoming myth, becoming symbol, but never quite disappearing, never quite forgotten. And then imagine us, now, today, standing in the ruins of those reconstructions, excavating the stones, reading the symbols, asking the questions, wondering who they were, those builders, where they came from, what they knew, and why they built in the way they did. And imagine, finally, that we are not so different from them, that we are, in a very real sense, them, that the memory they carried, we carry, that the patterns they created, we create, that the city they dreamed, we dream, and that one day, perhaps, we too will face the rising waters, or the failing climate, or the collapsing systems, and we too will be forced to move, to adapt, to carry what we can into an uncertain future. And we too will try to rebuild, to remember, to preserve the thread. And if we are wise, we will leave behind not just ruins but knowledge, not just structures but stories, not just technology but wisdom, so that those who come after, whether they are our children or our children's children, or peoples we cannot imagine, will have something to build upon, something to remember, something to guide them. And the thread will continue, and the story will go on. This is not a sad thought. It is a hopeful one, because it means that we are part of something larger than ourselves, something that transcends our individual lives, something that connects us to the deep past and the distant future, something that gives meaning to our struggles, our achievements, our very existence. We are the builders, the rememberers, the carriers of the thread. And as long as we continue, as long as we honor the past, as long as we build with intention, as long as we teach and preserve and pass on what we know, then the city will endure, not as a physical place but as an idea, as a vision, as a pattern encoded in the human mind and expressed, again and again, across time and space. And that is enough. That is more than enough. That is everything. So rest now. Let these thoughts settle. Let them drift through your mind as you drift toward sleep. Let them become part of your own memory, your own understanding, your own connection to the deep past. And know that in listening to this story, in engaging with these questions, in allowing yourself to wonder about the unsettling possibilities of history, you are participating in the very process we have described. You are remembering. You are part of the thread. You are carrying the story forward. And that matters. It matters more than you might think. Because history is not written by gods or kings or impersonal forces. It is written by individuals, by people who choose to remember, who choose to question, who choose to preserve, by people like you. So take this with you. Take the questions. Take the wonder. Take the sense that the past is not settled, that the story is not complete, that there are mysteries still waiting to be uncovered. And let that sense inform how you see the world, how you engage with it, how you contribute to it, because you are not a passive observer of history. You are an active participant. And the choices you make, what you remember, what you teach, what you build, will shape the future. Will become part of the thread that others, in their own time, will follow back to us. And perhaps, if we are very lucky, they will look at what we left behind and say, they remembered, they understood, they honored the past, and they built something worth preserving. That is the hope. That is the goal. Not to build something eternal, because nothing is eternal, but to build something meaningful. Something that carries the memory forward. Something that adds to the thread rather than breaking it. And we do that not through grand gestures, but through small acts. Through the daily practice of remembering, of learning, of teaching, of telling stories, of asking questions, of refusing to accept easy answers when deeper truths are available. And through the simple act of caring, of recognizing that the past is not dead, that it is alive in us, that it shapes who we are and who we can become, and that honoring it is not nostalgia, but wisdom. So let us end with one final question. Not a question we can answer definitively, but a question we can carry with us. A question that will continue to unfold as we learn more, discover more, remember more. The question is this: if the first cities were built before humans settled down, if the concept of urban life predates agriculture, if the patterns we now create are echoes of patterns that were created long ago and lost and remembered again, then what does that tell us about the nature of humanity? It tells us that we are not defined by our technologies. We are not defined by our material conditions. We are defined by our vision, by our ability to imagine something that does not yet exist and work to bring it into being, by our capacity for memory, for connection, for creating meaning out of chaos. And it tells us that this capacity is ancient. It is not a recent development. It is not the product of the last few thousand years. It is core to who we are. It has been with us from the beginning, and it will be with us until the end. And that means that no matter what challenges we face, no matter how dire the circumstances, no matter how much is lost, we will rebuild. We will remember. We will continue. Because that is what we do. That is who we are. We are the species that builds cities, that creates patterns, that imposes order on the world, that dreams of something better and works to make it real. And we have been doing this for so long, longer than we can fully comprehend, that it is woven into the fabric of our being. It is part of our DNA, our culture, our collective memory. It is the thread that runs through all of human history, connecting us to those who came before and to those who will come after. And as long as that thread endures, as long as we continue to remember and build and dream, then humanity endures. Not as a single civilization, but as an idea, as a pattern, as a presence in the world that refuses to be extinguished. And that is a powerful thing. That is a profound thing. That is, perhaps, the most important thing we can know about ourselves. So carry it with you. Carry the knowledge that you are part of something ancient and ongoing. That the city you inhabit, the structures you see, the patterns you unconsciously follow, all of these are echoes of something older. Something that has been lost and lost and found again, across the long arc of time. And in carrying that knowledge, you become a guardian of the thread, a keeper of the memory, a participant in the story. And the story goes on. It goes on in the stones we uncover, in the sites we excavate, in the myths we retell, in the questions we ask, in the patterns we create, in the cities we build, in the lives we live. It goes on in you. So if you have stayed with me through this long exploration, through these winding paths of evidence and speculation, of fact and myth, of stone and story, then I thank you. I thank you for your attention, for your curiosity, for your willingness to consider possibilities that challenge conventional understanding. And I ask you to do one more thing. Share this. Not the video necessarily, though you can if you wish, but share the questions. Share the wonder. Share the sense that history is not settled, that the past is deeper, more complex, more wondrous than we have been told. Share it with others who are curious, who are open, who are willing to stand at the edge of the known and peer into the darkness beyond, wondering what might be there. Because the more of us who ask these questions, the more of us who seek these answers, the more likely it is that we will uncover the truth, that we will find the lost cities, that we will recover the forgotten knowledge, that we will restore the thread that has been so often broken. And in doing so, we will not just understand the past. We will shape the future. So let us continue. Let us keep digging, keep questioning, keep remembering, and let us build, in our own time, something worthy of the long tradition we inherit. Something that honors those who came before and serves those who will come after. Something that adds to the thread. Something that carries the story forward. Because that is our task. That is our privilege. That is our place in the long, deep, unbroken lineage of humanity. And it is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for wondering. Thank you for being part of this journey. And may you carry these questions with you, wherever you go, into whatever future awaits. Good night, or good day, or good morning, wherever you are in the world, in this moment as these words reach you. Rest well, dream well, and remember, always remember, because memory is the bridge. It is the only bridge we have between past and future, between what was and what will be. And if we lose that bridge, if we allow it to crumble, then we lose everything. We become untethered from history, floating in an eternal present, unable to learn from what came before, unable to plan for what comes next. But we have not lost it. Not yet. The bridge still stands. And every time we excavate a site, every time we translate a text, every time we tell a story or ask a question about the past, we reinforce that bridge. We add another stone, another support, another connection. And that is sacred work. Not religious necessarily, but sacred in the sense that it is essential, fundamental. It is the work of preserving what makes us human. And it is work that anyone can do. You do not need to be an archaeologist or a historian or a scholar. You only need to be curious. You only need to care. You only need to recognize that the past is not a foreign country, but home. The place where we all come from. The place that shaped us whether we know it or not. And when you recognize that, when you truly feel it, then everything changes. You walk differently through the world. You see structures not just as buildings, but as statements. As expressions of human will, human creativity, human memory. You see patterns not as accidents, but as choices. As decisions made by people who, like you, were trying to make sense of the world, trying to create order, trying to leave something behind. And you feel connected. Not just to your own culture, your own time, your own place, but to all of humanity. To the entire sweep of human history. To the billions of lives that have been lived, the countless choices that have been made, the endless cycles of building and losing and rebuilding that have brought us to this moment. And in that connection, there is meaning. There is purpose. There is a sense that your life, however brief, however small, is part of something vastly larger. Something that extends back into the depths of time and forward into the unknowable future. And that is a gift from the past to the present. A gift that we, in turn, must pass forward. Now, as we come to the close of this exploration, let us reflect on what we have discovered. Not in terms of definitive answers, because there are none, but in terms of possibilities. In terms of the questions that have been opened rather than closed. We have seen that the conventional timeline of civilization may be incomplete. That there are sites, scattered across the world, that predate agriculture and yet display signs of urban planning, of collective effort, of sophisticated thought. Sites like Göbekli Tepe, like Karahan Tepe, like Poverty Point, like the proto-streets of the Levant, like the early plazas of Peru. We have seen that these sites suggest a pattern of experimentation with urban forms long before humans settled down permanently. A pattern that implies the idea of the city, the concept of gathering, organizing, structuring space, may be far older than we have allowed. And we have seen that this pattern is echoed in myth, in flood stories, in tales of earlier builders, in the insistence across cultures and centuries that something came before, that there was a time when knowledge was greater, when cities were grander, when the world was different. And we have asked, what if those myths are not fabrications? What if they are memory? What if they point, however dimly, toward a lost past? A past that existed before the last ice age ended, before the seas rose, before the coastlines were redrawn and the old world was drowned? And we have considered the possibility that what we see in the archaeological record is not the birth of civilization, but its resurrection. That the survivors of that lost world carried fragments of knowledge with them into the highlands, into the interior, into the marginal lands. And that they tried, in their own way, to rebuild, to remember, to restore what had been lost. And we have recognized that this is not a settled question, that the evidence is fragmentary, that much remains unknown, but that the question itself is worth asking, that it opens doors, that it invites us to see the past not as a closed book, but as an ongoing mystery. And in that mystery there is wonder, there is awe, there is the recognition that we are still, even now, at the beginning of understanding, that the story of humanity is deeper, longer, more complex than we have yet grasped, and that every discovery brings us closer to the truth, but also reveals how much more there is to learn. So what do we do with this? How do we carry this forward? We remain open. We remain curious. We remain humble. We recognize that certainty is the enemy of discovery, that the moment we believe we have all the answers is the moment we stop asking questions. And it is the questions that matter, the questions that drive us forward, the questions that connect us to the past and propel us into the future. And we honor the work of those who came before us, the archaeologists who dug in the dirt, the linguists who decoded ancient texts, the historians who pieced together fragments of evidence, the storytellers who kept the myths alive. All of them contributed to our understanding. All of them added to the thread. And we, in our own small way, must do the same, whether through scholarship or through simply paying attention, through teaching or through learning, through preserving or through remembering. We must add our own contribution, however modest, to the ongoing work of understanding who we are and where we came from, because that work is never finished. It is ongoing. It is the work of every generation in every age. And it is work that gives meaning to our lives, that connects us to something larger than ourselves, that ensures the thread does not break. And as long as the thread endures, as long as we continue to ask and answer and ask again, then we remain human. We remain connected. We remain part of the story. And the story, as we have seen, is long. It is deep. It is cyclical. It is full of loss and recovery, of forgetting and remembering, of building and rebuilding. And it is ours, all of ours, not just archaeologists or historians or scholars, but every person who has ever wondered about the past, every person who has ever stood in the ruins of an ancient site and felt the weight of time, every person who has ever looked at the stars and wondered if others, long ago, looked at the same stars and asked the same questions. We are all part of it. We are all carriers of the thread. And that is both a privilege and a responsibility. So carry it well, honor it, preserve it, pass it on, and know that in doing so, you are participating in something ancient, something essential, something that defines what it means to be human. And what does it mean to be human? This is the question at the heart of everything we have explored. What does it mean to be the species that builds cities before settling down, that imagines patterns before needing them, that remembers things it has never directly experienced? It means that we are not merely reactive. We are not simply creatures of instinct, responding to immediate needs. We are visionaries. We are planners. We are beings who exist simultaneously in past, present, and future, who carry memory forward and project intention ahead, who stand in the thin slice of the present moment but are informed by millennia behind and oriented toward millennia ahead. And this is extraordinary. This is what separates us from every other species on this planet. Not our intelligence alone, but our temporal consciousness, our ability to remember, to learn, to imagine, to plan across spans of time that exceed our individual lifespans. And that ability is ancient, predates writing, predates agriculture. It predates everything we conventionally associate with civilization. It is, in fact, the foundation upon which civilization is built. Because before you can build a city, you must be able to imagine it. Before you can organize a society, you must be able to conceive of organization. Before you can create patterns, you must be able to think in patterns. And the evidence we have examined suggests that humans have been thinking in these ways for far longer than we previously believed. That the cognitive leap, the shift from purely immediate concerns to long-term planning, from survival to symbolism, from reaction to creation, happened not 12,000 years ago with the advent of agriculture, but much earlier. Tens of thousands of years earlier. Perhaps even hundreds of thousands. And if that is true, then the cities we build today are not new inventions. They are not radical departures from our evolutionary heritage. They are expressions of something deeply rooted in human nature. Something that has been with us, in some form, for as long as we have been recognizably human. And that means that the city, the concept of gathering, of organizing space, of creating patterns, is not a cultural artifact that could have been otherwise. It is not an arbitrary choice. It is an inevitability. It is something we were always going to create because it is part of who we are. But it also means that the city is fragile. Because if it is part of us, then it is subject to the same cycles that govern all living things. Birth, growth, maturity, decline, death, and rebirth. The cycle repeats. Always. And what we are seeing now in our current moment is not unprecedented. It is part of the cycle. We are in a phase of growth, of expansion, of building. But that phase will not last forever. Cannot. Because cycles, by definition, turn. And when this cycle turns, when the climate shifts or the resources dwindle or the systems fail, we will face the same challenges that every civilization has faced. We will adapt or we will fall. We will remember or we will forget. And the degree to which we remember, the degree to which we have preserved knowledge, encoded wisdom, maintained the thread will determine which path we take. So this is not an academic question. This is not idle speculation about the distant past. This is a question about the future, about our future, about whether we will learn from the cycles that came before or whether we will repeat them blindly. And the only way to learn is to remember, to study the past, to understand the patterns, to recognize that we are not the first to face these challenges and that others, before us, found ways to survive, to adapt, to carry knowledge forward even in the face of catastrophe. And their success, the fact that we are here now having this conversation, is proof that memory works, that the thread, however frayed, however tenuous, can endure, that knowledge, once gained, can be preserved and transmitted and recovered, even after periods of darkness and forgetting. But it requires effort. It requires intention. It requires us to value the past not just as a curiosity, but as a guide, as a repository of hard-won wisdom, as a map that shows not just where we have been, but where we might go. And that is what we have been doing here in this long exploration. We have been tracing the thread. We have been following it backward, into the depths of time, looking for the places where it knots, where it frays, where it disappears beneath the waves. And in doing so, we have found not emptiness, but richness, not ignorance, but knowledge, not the beginning, but a continuation. And that continuation is the story of humanity, the story of building and losing and rebuilding, of remembering and forgetting and remembering again, of cities that rise and fall and rise once more. And we are part of that story, not observers, but participants, not readers, but authors. We are writing the next chapter, and what we write will determine whether the thread endures, whether the memory survives, whether future generations will be able to look back at us and say, they remembered, they understood, they honored the past, and they gave us something to build upon. So let us write well, let us build with intention, let us remember with reverence, and let us recognize that every choice we make, every structure we create, every story we tell, is part of the thread, is part of the continuity that connects past to future, that binds humanity together across time and space. And in recognizing that, we find meaning, we find purpose, we find a reason to care about the past and to work for the future. Because they are not separate, they are one. They are the same story, told in different voices, expressed in different forms, but fundamentally unified by the thread of memory that runs through all of human history. And that thread is strong. It has survived ice ages and floods and wars and catastrophes. It has survived the fall of empires and the loss of languages and the drowning of cities. It has survived because people, ordinary people like you and me, have chosen to preserve it, to protect it, to pass it on. And we can do the same. We must do the same. Because if we do not, if we allow the thread to break, then everything that came before us will be lost. And everything that comes after us will be diminished. But if we do, if we remember, if we preserve, if we honor the past, then the story continues. The cycle turns. And the city, in all its forms, endures. Not as a physical place, but as an idea, as a pattern, as a vision of what humanity can be when we come together, when we organize, when we create meaning out of chaos. And that vision is beautiful. It is powerful. It is worth preserving. So let us preserve it. Let us be the keepers of the thread. Let us be the ones who remember. And let us build, in our own time, something worthy of the long tradition we inherit. Something that will stand not just for years or centuries, but for millennia. Something that will be remembered. And perhaps that is the final lesson. The lesson that emerges from all of this exploration, from all of these questions, from all of this evidence scattered across time and space. The lesson is this: we are not separate from the past. We are the past. We are the continuation of every life that came before us, every choice that was made, every city that was built. We carry it all within us, in our genes, in our culture, in our collective memory. And what we do now will be carried forward by those who come after us in the same way. So the question is not, what did they do, those ancient builders? The question is, what will we do? What will we build? What will we preserve? What will we pass on? And the answer lies not in grand gestures or monumental structures, though those have their place. The answer lies in the small, daily acts of remembering, of teaching, of learning, of telling stories, of asking questions, of caring about the past and working for the future. It lies in recognizing that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that our lives, however brief, are threads in the great tapestry of human history, and that the pattern we weave matters. It matters to us. It matters to those who come after. It matters to the continuity of human memory, human culture, human civilization. And it matters to the past, to the people who came before us. Because every time we remember them, every time we honor their work, every time we learn from their successes and failures, we justify their struggles. We give meaning to their lives. We ensure that their efforts were not in vain. And that is a profound thing. It is a way of reaching back across the millennia and saying, we see you, we remember you, we honor you, and we will continue the work you began. And in saying that, we create continuity, we forge connection, we strengthen the thread. And the thread is everything. It is the only thing that endures. Everything else, the buildings, the technologies, the empires, eventually crumbles. But the thread of memory, of knowledge, of human connection across time can survive. If we protect it, if we nurture it, if we pass it on. So that is the task. That is the responsibility. That is the privilege. To remember, to preserve, to pass on, and to build, in our own time, something that adds to the thread rather than breaking it. Something that honors the past and serves the future. Something that says, we were here, we cared, we understood, and we contributed. That is enough. That is all we can do, and it is everything. So as you drift now, toward sleep, or toward the rest of your day, or toward whatever comes next, carry this with you. Carry the knowledge that you are part of the thread, that your life, your choices, your memory matters, that you are not alone in time, but connected. Connected to those who came before and to those who will come after. Connected by the simple act of remembering. And know that in listening to this story, in engaging with these questions, in allowing yourself to wonder about the deep past and the possibilities it holds, you have already participated. You have already contributed. You have already strengthened the thread. And for that, I thank you. From the bottom of my heart, I thank you, because this work of remembering, of questioning, of exploring the margins of accepted history, cannot be done alone. It requires a community of curious minds, open hearts, willing spirits, a community that values the past not just as a curiosity, but as a guide, as a source of wisdom, as a foundation upon which to build the future. And you are part of that community, whether you realize it or not, whether you intended it or not. By being here, by listening, by caring enough to stay with this long exploration, you have joined the company of those who remember, who ask, who seek, and that company stretches back through time, back through all the archaeologists and historians and storytellers who have worked to uncover the past, back through all the people who preserved the myths, who carved the stones, who told the stories around the fire, back through all the generations who lived and died and passed on what they knew, ensuring that the thread did not break. And it stretches forward as well, forward through all the people who will come after us, who will dig in the ruins of our cities, who will wonder about us as we wonder about those who came before, who will ask the same questions, who will seek the same answers, who will, in their own time, contribute to the thread. And we are the link. We are the connection between past and future. We are the ones who carry the memory now in this moment. And what we do with it matters. So let us do well. Let us be worthy of the trust placed in us by those who came before. Let us be worthy of the hope that those who come after will have something to learn from, something to build upon, something to remember. Let us be the keepers of the thread, the guardians of memory, the builders of continuity, and let us never forget that the past is not dead. It is alive. It is alive in the stones we uncover, the stories we tell, the patterns we create. It is alive in us. And as long as we remember, as long as we honor, as long as we pass on what we know, it will continue to live. It will continue to guide. It will continue to connect us across the vast expanse of time. And that is a beautiful thing. That is a powerful thing. That is, perhaps, the most human thing of all. So rest now, dream now, and remember that you are part of the story, that you are a thread in the tapestry, that your life, your choices, your memory matters. Remember that the city was built before we settled down, that the patterns we create are echoes of patterns that were created long ago, that we are not the first, and we will not be the last. Remember that the thread endures, that the memory survives, that the story continues, and be proud. Be proud to be part of it. Be proud to carry it forward. Be proud to add your own voice to the chorus of human memory that stretches back into the depths of time and forward into the unknowable future. Because you are part of something ancient, something essential, something that defines what it means to be human. And that is enough. That is everything. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for being part of this journey. And may you carry these questions, these wonders, these memories with you, wherever you go. Good night. Rest well. And remember, always remember, the thread endures, the story continues, and you are part of it. And so we arrive at the final words, the last echoes of this long meditation on time, memory, and the patterns that define us. But endings are illusions, because the thread does not end here. Continues in you, in the thoughts this has sparked, in the questions it has raised, in the sense of wonder it has, I hope, awakened. And it continues in the world, in the stones still buried, in the sites still undiscovered, in the coastlines still submerged beneath the waves, in the myths still told, in the patterns still repeated, in the cities still being built. The story of humanity is not a story that can be finished. It is ongoing. It is perpetual. It is, in the deepest sense, eternal, not because any individual or civilization lasts forever, but because the pattern itself, the thread itself, endures. And you are part of that pattern. Right now, in this moment, reading these words, thinking these thoughts, connecting to the deep past and the distant future through the simple act of remembering. And that connection is sacred. Not in a religious sense necessarily, but in the sense that it is fundamental. essential. It is what makes us human, what gives our lives meaning beyond the immediate, what allows us to transcend the limitations of our individual existence and participate in something vastly larger. And in participating, we are transformed. We become more than ourselves. We become part of the continuum, part of the thread, part of the story. And the story, as we have seen, is full of mystery, full of wonder, full of questions that may never be fully answered but are worth asking nonetheless. Questions like, what if the first cities were built before humans settled down? What if the patterns we create are memories of patterns that were created long ago and lost and remembered again? What if the conventional timeline of civilization is incomplete and there are chapters we have yet to uncover? And the answer to all of these questions is the same: maybe. Maybe. We do not know. We cannot know with certainty. But the possibility alone is enough to shift our understanding, to open doors, to invite exploration. And that is the gift of uncertainty, the gift of not knowing, because it keeps us curious, keeps us humble, keeps us seeking. And in seeking, we find not just answers but better questions. And better questions lead to deeper understanding. And deeper understanding leads to wisdom. And wisdom is what we need, now more than ever, because the challenges we face, as a species, as a civilization, as inhabitants of this fragile planet, are immense. They require not just knowledge but wisdom, not just technology but understanding, not just power but perspective. And perspective is what the past gives us. It gives us the long view, the deep view, the understanding that we are part of cycles that are much larger than any individual life, any individual civilization. Cycles of rise and fall, of creation and destruction, of memory and forgetting. And in understanding those cycles, we gain the wisdom to navigate them, to make choices that honor the past and serve the future, to build in ways that are sustainable, resilient, meaningful. And that is the ultimate lesson of this exploration. Not that we should try to reconstruct some imagined golden age. Not that we should seek to replicate the past, but that we should learn from it, that we should recognize the patterns, that we should understand that we are not the first to face these challenges, and that others before us found ways to survive, to adapt, to carry knowledge forward even in the face of catastrophe. And if they could do it, so can we. We can survive. We can adapt. We can build something that endures, not forever but for long enough to pass the thread to the next generation, long enough to add our chapter to the story, long enough to matter. And that is all we can ask, to matter, to contribute, to be part of something larger than ourselves. And in being part of that, we find meaning, we find purpose, we find connection. And connection is what we all seek in the end. Connection to each other, connection to the past, connection to the future, connection to something that transcends the fleeting moment and anchors us in the larger flow of time. And that connection is available to all of us. It is not reserved for scholars or archaeologists or historians. It is available to anyone who is willing to look, to listen, to remember. To anyone who is willing to stand in the ruins of an ancient site and feel the weight of time. To anyone who is willing to ask, who were they? What did they know? What can I learn from them? To anyone who is willing to recognize that the past is not a foreign country, but home. The place where we all come from. The place that shaped us, whether we know it or not. And in returning to that home, in memory, we find ourselves. We find our place in the long story of humanity. We find our connection to the thread. And the thread is strong. It has survived ice ages and floods and wars and disasters. It has survived the fall of empires and the loss of languages and the drowning of cities. It has survived because people, ordinary people, extraordinary people, people like you and me, have chosen to preserve it, to protect it, to pass it on. And that choice is available to us now. In this moment, in every moment, we can choose to remember. We can choose to honor the past. We can choose to build with intention and wisdom. We can choose to be part of the thread rather than breaking it. And if we make that choice, if enough of us make that choice, then the story continues. The cycle turns. And the city, in all its forms, endures. not as a physical place but as an idea, as a pattern, as a vision of what humanity can be when we come together, when we remember, when we build with care and foresight and love. And that vision is worth fighting for, worth preserving, worth passing on. So let us do that. Let us be the ones who remember. Let us be the ones who preserve. Let us be the ones who pass on. And let us build in our own time something that will be remembered, something that will matter, something that will add to the thread and strengthen it for those who come after. Because that is our task. That is our privilege. That is our gift to the future. And it is enough. It is more than enough. It is everything. So go now. Go forth into the world with this knowledge, with these questions, with this sense of wonder and connection and responsibility. And remember that you are part of the story, that you are a thread in the tapestry, that your life, your choices, your memory matters. Remember that the first cities may have been built before humans settled down, that the patterns we create are echoes of ancient dreams, that the thread of human memory stretches back further than we can see and forward further than we can imagine. And remember that you are not alone. You are connected, connected to those who came before and to those who will come after, connected by the simple, profound act of remembering. And in that connection there is hope, there is meaning, there is purpose, and there is the story, the long, deep, beautiful story of humanity. And it continues, in you, now, always. And with that, we close this chapter. But the book remains open. The pages keep turning. And the story, the long, deep story, goes on. It goes on in the excavations that continue in Turkey, in Peru, in the Levant, in every corner of the world where archaeologists are uncovering evidence that challenges what we thought we knew. It goes on in the laboratories where scientists are analyzing ancient DNA, reconstructing migration patterns, revealing connections we never suspected. It goes on in the universities where scholars are translating ancient texts, decoding symbols, piecing together the fragments of lost knowledge. And it goes on in the minds of individuals, people like you, who hear these stories and wonder, and in wondering keep the questions alive. Because questions are the lifeblood of understanding. Without questions, knowledge stagnates. It becomes dogma. It becomes brittle. But with questions, knowledge remains fluid, dynamic, alive. It grows. It deepens. It evolves. And that evolution is essential, because the truth is not static. It is not a fixed point that we reach and then stop. The truth is a horizon, always receding, always beckoning, always inviting us forward. And as we move toward it, we see new landscapes, new possibilities, new mysteries. And those mysteries are not obstacles. They are gifts. They are invitations to explore, to discover, to understand more deeply. And in accepting those invitations, we participate in the grand human project of making sense of the world, of understanding our place in it, of honoring the past while building the future. And that project is collective. It is not the work of individuals alone, but of communities, of cultures, of civilizations, of humanity as a whole. And we are, all of us, participants, whether we realize it or not, whether we intend it or not. Simply by living, by thinking, by remembering, we contribute. And what we contribute matters. It matters because it shapes the future. It matters because it honors the past. It matters because it strengthens the thread. And the thread is what binds us. It is what makes us more than isolated individuals adrift in time. It makes us part of a continuity, part of a tradition, part of a story that is larger and longer and more meaningful than any single life could be. And that story is our inheritance. It is what we receive from those who came before. And it is our responsibility to pass it on, intact and enriched, to those who come after. And in passing it on, we ensure that the work of the past was not in vain, that the knowledge that was so hard-won, the structures that were so carefully built, the patterns that were so thoughtfully conceived, continue to inform and inspire. And in being informed and inspired, we make better choices. We build better cities. We create better societies. We become, in small ways, better humans. And that is the point. not to recreate the past, not to return to some imagined golden age, but to learn from the past, to understand it, to honor it, and to use it as a foundation for building something new, something that carries forward the best of what came before while adapting to the challenges of the present and the needs of the future. And that synthesis of past and present, of memory and innovation, of tradition and progress, is the essence of human culture. It is what we do. It is what we have always done. It is what we will continue to do, as long as we remember. And we must remember. We must. Because forgetting is death. Not physical death, but cultural death. Civilizational death. The death of meaning and continuity and connection. And we have seen that death before. We have seen civilizations collapse. We have seen knowledge lost. We have seen the thread fray and nearly break. But it has always been restored. Always. Because there have always been people, humble, determined, visionary people, who refused to let it break, who preserved what they could, who passed on what they knew, who kept the memory alive, even in the darkest times. And we must be those people now. In our time, in our place, we must be the keepers of the thread. And that means more than just preserving old knowledge. It means creating new knowledge. It means asking new questions. It means exploring new possibilities. It means being willing to challenge accepted narratives when the evidence suggests they are incomplete. It means being open to the possibility that the past is deeper, more complex, more wondrous than we have allowed ourselves to imagine. And it means being humble enough to admit that we do not know everything, that there are mysteries still unsolved, that there are questions still unanswered, that there are chapters of human history that are still hidden, waiting to be discovered. And in admitting that, we open ourselves to discovery. We create space for new insights. We make possible breakthroughs that would otherwise be impossible. Because breakthroughs come not from certainty, but from doubt. Not from knowing, but from questioning. Not from closing doors, but from opening them. And the doors are open now, wider than they have been in a long time, because the evidence is accumulating. The anomalies are multiplying. The conventional narratives are straining under the weight of new discoveries. And that is exciting. That is thrilling. That is what makes this such a fascinating time to be alive and curious about the past. Because we are on the verge, perhaps, of a paradigm shift. A fundamental change in how we understand human history. A recognition that the timeline is longer, the story more complex, the achievements of our ancestors more impressive than we have given them credit for. And if that shift happens, if we collectively decide to open our minds to the possibility that civilization is older, that the patterns run deeper, that the thread extends further back, then everything changes. Not just our understanding of the past, but our understanding of ourselves, of who we are, of what we are capable of what we might become. And that understanding is empowering. It is liberating. It is transformative. Because if we are not at the beginning, but somewhere in the middle or even late in the story, then we carry within us the accumulated wisdom of countless generations. We carry the memory of cities that rose and fell. We carry the knowledge of cycles that turned again and again. We carry the understanding that survival is possible, that adaptation is achievable, that continuity can be maintained even in the face of catastrophe. And that is a powerful inheritance. That is a gift beyond measure. So let us honor it. Let us use it. Let us build upon it. And let us remember, always, that we are part of something ancient and ongoing. Something that stretches back into the mists of prehistory and forward into the unknowable future. Something that connects us to every human who has ever lived and ever will live. Something that gives our lives meaning, purpose, and place in the grand tapestry of existence. And that something is the story. The long, deep, beautiful, tragic, hopeful story of humanity. And it continues. In you, now, always. And as we prepare to part ways, you to your dreams or your day, me to the silence from which these words emerged, let us take one final moment together, one final breath, one final reflection on what we have explored and what it means. We have walked through time together, through the highlands of Anatolia and the deserts of Peru. through the river valleys of the Levant and the earthworks of North America, through stone circles and proto-streets, through ritual centers and proto-cities, through evidence that challenges and myths that compel, through questions that open and mysteries that deepen. And in walking this path, we have touched something ancient, something fundamental. We have touched the thread, and the thread has touched us. It has reminded us that we are not alone in time, that we are part of a continuum, that the people who built these stones, who carved these patterns, who preserved these memories, are our people. They are us, and we are them. And in recognizing that connection, we are changed. We see the world differently. We see history not as a distant, dead thing, but as a living presence. We see the past not as settled, but as dynamic, full of possibility and mystery. And we see ourselves not as the culmination of history, but as participants in an ongoing process. A process of building and losing and rebuilding, of remembering and forgetting and remembering again. And that perspective is humbling, but it is also empowering, because it means that what we do matters, that our choices have weight, that we are not just passive observers of history, but active creators of it. And what we create now will become the past for those who come after. It will become the evidence they excavate, the texts they translate, the myths they puzzle over. It will become the thread they follow back to us. And what will they find? What will they say about us? What will they learn from us? The answer depends on what we choose to preserve, what we choose to build, what we choose to pass on. And that choice is available to us in every moment, in every decision, in every act of remembering or forgetting, of building or destroying, of connecting or isolating. And if we choose wisely, if we choose to remember, to preserve, to build with intention and care, then we will leave behind something worth finding, something worth learning from, something that adds to the thread rather than breaking it. And that is our task. That is our opportunity. That is our contribution to the long story of humanity. And it is a task that requires no special qualifications, no advanced degrees, no positions of power. It requires only awareness, only curiosity, only care. And you have those. You have them, or you would not still be here, still listening, still engaged with these questions. You have them, and that means you are already part of the solution, already part of the work of preserving and passing on, already a keeper of the thread. And for that, again, I thank you, because this work cannot be done alone. It requires all of us who care, all of us who wonder, all of us who recognize that the past is not a luxury, but a necessity, not an escape, but a foundation. And on that foundation, we build the future, not in isolation from the past, but in conversation with it, in dialogue with it, in partnership with it. And that partnership is the source of wisdom, because the past has lessons to teach us, lessons about resilience and adaptation, about rise and fall, about the fragility of civilization and the endurance of human spirit. And if we are willing to learn those lessons, if we are willing to listen to what the stones and the myths and the patterns have to tell us, then we can navigate the challenges of our own time with greater clarity, greater wisdom, greater hope. And that hope is real. It is not naive optimism. It is not denial of the very real threats we face. It is grounded hope. Hope based on the understanding that humanity has faced catastrophic challenges before and survived, that we have lost much and recovered, that the thread, however frayed, has endured. And if it has endured before, it can endure again, if we protect it, if we nurture it, if we pass it on. And that is what we must do. That is the imperative of our time, to be the generation that remembered, that preserved, that honored the past and built for the future, to be the generation that strengthened the thread rather than breaking it. And we can do that, all of us, together, not through grand gestures alone, though those have their place, but through the small, daily acts of memory and care, through teaching our children the old stories, through supporting the work of archaeologists and historians, through visiting ancient sites with reverence rather than just as tourists, through asking questions and remaining curious and refusing to accept easy answers when deeper truths are available. Through all of these small acts, we participate in the grand project of preservation, of continuity, of cultural survival. And that participation matters. It matters to the past, which deserves to be remembered. It matters to the future, which deserves to inherit knowledge. And it matters to us now because it gives our lives meaning and purpose and place in the larger story. And meaning is what we all seek. Purpose is what we all need. Place is what we all long for. And the past gives us those things. It gives us roots. It gives us context. It gives us perspective. It reminds us that we are part of something much larger than ourselves. Something ancient and enduring. Something that connects us across time and space to all of humanity. And in that connection, we find not just meaning, but belonging. We find that we are not isolated, not adrift, not alone. We are part of the family of humanity, part of the long, unbroken line that stretches back into the depths of time and forward into the unknowable future. And that is a beautiful thing. That is a profound thing. That is, in the deepest sense, what it means to be human. To remember, to connect, to belong. And we do belong. All of us. To the past, to the present, to the future, to each other. And in recognizing that belonging, we find peace. We find purpose. We find home. So rest now. Rest easy. Rest in the knowledge that you are part of the story. That you are connected. That you belong. And dream. Dream of the ancient cities that once stood on shores now drowned. Dream of the builders who carved the stones and shaped the patterns and passed the knowledge forward. Dream of the thread that runs through all of human history, connecting us all. And know that in dreaming you are remembering. And in remembering you are keeping the thread alive. And the thread is everything. It is the past and the future. It is memory and hope. It is connection and belonging. It is us. All of us, together, across time, forever. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for being part of the thread. Good night. And if you find yourself unable to sleep, if these thoughts have awakened something in you rather than lulled you to rest, then know that this too is part of the process, part of the journey, because sometimes remembering is not peaceful. Sometimes it is unsettling. Sometimes it challenges us, provokes us, demands that we reconsider everything we thought we knew. And that discomfort is valuable. It is the feeling of growth, of expansion, of the mind stretching to accommodate new possibilities. So do not resist it. Do not push it away. Sit with it. Let it work on you. Let it reshape your understanding of history, of humanity, of yourself. Because you are part of this story, not just as a listener, but as a participant. Your life is woven into the tapestry. Your choices contribute to the pattern. Your memory adds to the thread. And what you do with this knowledge, how you carry it forward, how you share it, how you let it inform your understanding of the world matters. It matters because knowledge is not passive. It is active. It is transformative. Changes us. And in changing us, it changes the world. Because we are the world. We are the ones who build the cities, who tell the stories, who preserve the memories. We are the ones who decide what endures and what is lost, what is remembered and what is forgotten. And that is a tremendous responsibility. But it is also a tremendous opportunity. Because if we choose to remember, if we choose to honor the past, to learn from it, to build upon it, then we can create something new. Something that honors the old patterns while adapting to new realities. Something that carries the thread forward into the future, stronger and more resilient than ever. And that is the synthesis we seek. Not a return to the past, but a learning from it. Not a rejection of the present, but an enrichment of it. Not a fear of the future, but a preparation for it. And that synthesis is possible. It is within our reach. But it requires effort. It requires intention. It requires us to value the past not just as a curiosity, but as a resource, as a guide, as a teacher. And the past has much to teach us. About resilience in the face of catastrophe. About adaptation to changing climates. about the preservation of knowledge through periods of darkness, about the importance of community, of cooperation, of shared vision. All of these lessons are encoded in the archaeological record, in the stones and the sites and the patterns we have explored. They are there, waiting to be read, waiting to be learned, waiting to be applied. And if we read them, if we truly understand them, then we gain wisdom. Not just knowledge, but wisdom. The wisdom to navigate the challenges of our own time with greater skill, greater foresight, greater hope. And that wisdom is desperately needed, because the challenges we face are real. They are urgent. They are potentially catastrophic. But they are not unprecedented. Humanity has faced existential threats before: climate shifts, resource depletion, social collapse, and we have survived. Not easily, not without loss, but we have survived. And the reason we have survived is because of the thread. Because people in every age have chosen to preserve what mattered, to pass on what they knew, to ensure that the memory, the knowledge, the wisdom did not die with them. And we must do the same. We must be the ones who, in our time, protect the thread, who strengthen it, who pass it on to the next generation intact and enriched. And that means more than just preserving old knowledge. It means creating new knowledge. It means solving new problems. It means adapting ancient wisdom to modern circumstances. It means being creative, being innovative, being bold, but always grounded, always connected, always aware of the thread that runs through us and binds us to all of humanity, past and future. And that balance between innovation and tradition, between progress and preservation, between the new and the ancient is the key. It is the secret. It is what allows civilizations to endure, because civilizations that forget the past are doomed to repeat its mistakes. And civilizations that cling too tightly to the past are unable to adapt to changing circumstances. But civilizations that honor the past while embracing the future, those are the ones that thrive. Those are the ones that endure. Those are the ones that contribute most powerfully to the long story of humanity. And we can be such a civilization. We can, if we choose, if we commit, if we remember. And remembering is not just an intellectual exercise. It is not just a matter of knowing facts or dates or names. Remembering is an act of the heart. It is a commitment to honor those who came before us, to recognize that we stand on their shoulders, that everything we have, everything we are, is built upon their foundations. And in recognizing that, we gain humility, we gain perspective, we gain gratitude, and gratitude is transformative. It changes how we see the world. It changes how we interact with it. It makes us more careful, more thoughtful, more reverent. Because when we are grateful for what we have inherited, we are less likely to squander it. We are more likely to preserve it, to protect it, to pass it on. And that is what the world needs now. People who are grateful, people who are aware, people who recognize that we are not self-made, but part of a long lineage, part of a tradition, part of a story that is much larger than any individual life. And in recognizing that, we find our place, we find our purpose, we find our responsibility, and we fulfill it, not perfectly, not without struggle, but with intention, with care, with love. Love for the past, love for the future, love for the thread that connects them. And that love is not sentimental. It is fierce. It is protective. It is a commitment to ensure that what has been gained is not lost, that what has been built is not destroyed, that what has been remembered is not forgotten. And that commitment is what makes us human, what makes us worthy of the inheritance we have received, what makes us capable of passing it on. So let us commit. Let us dedicate ourselves to the work of preservation and continuity. Let us be the ones who remember, who honor, who pass on. Let us be the keepers of the thread. And let us do that work not out of obligation, but out of love, out of reverence, out of a deep recognition that we are part of something ancient and beautiful and essential, something that must endure, and will endure, if we protect it, if we nurture it, if we remember. And so we come truly now to the end, the final words of this long exploration, the last notes of this meditation on time and memory and the patterns that define us. But even as we end, we know that nothing truly ends. The story continues. The thread persists. The work goes on. It goes on in the ground, where new sites wait to be discovered. It goes on in the laboratories, where new technologies reveal old secrets. It goes on in the minds of scholars and storytellers, archaeologists and dreamers. And it goes on in you, in the thoughts this has sparked, in the questions it has raised, in the connections it has made, because you are changed by this. However subtly, however quietly, you have been touched by the past. You have felt the weight of time. You have glimpsed the depth of human history and your place within it. And that changes everything. Or it can, if you let it, can change how you see the world, how you value the past, how you think about the future, how you understand yourself and your relationship to the long, deep story of humanity. And in that change, there is power. There is potential. There is the possibility of living more intentionally, more connected, more aware. And awareness is the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom is the beginning of right action. And right action is what the world needs most. So take this with you. Take the awareness. Take the questions. Take the sense of wonder and connection and responsibility. And let it guide you, not in grand gestures necessarily, but in small choices, in how you live, in what you value, in how you relate to the past and prepare for the future. And know that in making those choices, you are weaving the thread. You are adding your strand to the great tapestry of human history. You are contributing to the pattern that future generations will follow back to us. And what a privilege that is. What an honor. What a sacred trust. To be part of the story. To carry the memory. To pass the thread forward. This is what it means to be human. This is what we do. This is who we are. Builders. Rememberers. Keepers of the thread. Across time. Across space. Across the vast arc of human existence. From the first cities that may have been built before we settled down, to the cities we build today, to the cities that will be built tomorrow. The pattern repeats. The cycle turns. The story continues. And we are part of it. All of us. Together. Bound by memory. Connected. By time. United by the thread. And as long as we remember, as long as we honor the past, as long as we build for the future, then the thread endures. And the story goes on. Forever. In us. Through us. Beyond us. Thank you for this journey. Thank you for your patience, your attention, your willingness to explore these deep and unsettling questions. Thank you for remembering. And now truly rest. Rest in the knowledge that you are part of something ancient and ongoing. Something beautiful and essential. Rest in the knowledge that you belong, that you are connected, that you matter. Rest in the knowledge that the thread endures, and the story continues. In you, always. Good night. Sleep well. And remember, always remember, the first cities may have been built before we settled down. The patterns we create are echoes of ancient dreams. And we are the ones who carry those dreams forward. We are the thread. And the thread is eternal. Good night.